Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. My name is Azaran, and today I'll be talking about my understanding of some of the problems in League of Legends. So, I've broken the problems up that I understand into three categories. Those problems are general game conditions, champions as a whole, and individual champions. I intend to cover them in three separate sections, if at all possible. So, for a little bit of background on me, I've only been with the game for a few years, to be precise. I'm not a high elo player. I play this game a lot for fun, though I do play a lot of ranked as well. I mostly just clown around when I'm not playing ranked, and I take my ranked games quite seriously. You can op.gg me if you like. My summoner name is the same as the one on my channel. But I think that my points will stand for themselves regardless of elo. So let's get into it. First thing on the docket, problem with game pacing. Now, the problem with game pacing comes down to not that the games are too fast or too slow, but that early, mid, and late game don't have clear distinctions and separations, especially when it comes to champions. So that's a bit of a problem. Primarily because a lot of champions rely on this distinction in order to thrive. When I say that they're separate, I don't mean that they're unattainable or that there are barriers between them, but rather the ability to transition between them comes less down to player skill, understanding, awareness, and cooperation, more down to just that's how the game goes, and it just happens. There's no effort, no concerted effort necessary to push the game in a direction. Laning phase just ends. There's no strategy or intention or wisdom required behind it. This is especially noticeable in mid lane. Take Talon, for example. Talon plays the same way all through lane. He does nothing to end the lane when he wants to do it, and he does nothing to keep the lane going. Now, of course, he does nothing to keep the lane going because he wants the lane to be over. He wants to get to the part of the game where he runs around and murders people. But there exists no such thing. There is no effort on the part of the player to affect the way in which the game transitions between phases. It's a huge problem. Now, the people who suffer from this the most, of course, are mid and top lane. Jungle kind of does the same thing the whole time. Run around, solo camps, kill people when they're out of position. That's what jungle does. Bot lane, just farm. Just farm in 2v2 as much as you can. Try not to get gangbanged. That's. But mid and top suffer heavily because a lot of champions there rely on the conditions, not just the item timings and gold values related to them. So take early game champions. Early game champions do not rely simply on base stats or low gold in lane to thrive. They also rely on the pressure that laning phase enables them to put on the enemy. So what does this mean? It means that if I'm playing, let's say I'm Renekton, for example. If I'm playing Renekton and I'm constantly able to shove the enemy in, roam, and go into the enemy jungle, and to go help my jungler take Rift Herald, to go down mid, flash on the mid laner and kill them, something like that. If I have that ability, Renekton is good. It doesn't matter if I'm at 3 items or no items. Being in that situation where my ability to control the lane rewards me more contributes to my power drastically more than just the free stats and power that I get out of the utility and base values of my kit. It's an important understanding. Now, as we transition into the mid game, where people are out of lane, people are free to go around more, it becomes harder for Renekton because the enemy is already on the move. The enemy is moving in groups, they're seeking out the skirmishes, and they're preparing for the fight. They don't have to juggle the difficulty of maintaining their own lane opponent and struggling to keep priority, control, and farm up while worrying about what might happen. Generally, the threat level of an early game champion drastically falls as soon as the enemy team is no longer required to be committed to staying in a place and not just catching the wave, but actually staying with the wave and continuing to farm them. So what things contribute to this problem? Things that contribute to this problem are wave clear, and we're going to talk about that later. I'm not just jacking off the Reddit users who complain about wave clear. Ease of roams, and consistency of lane punishment to the tower. Okay, so that's three big things. So first of all, wave clear is not a problem all by itself. There are some champions that wave clear is what they do. It's just they just stall the game out. That's what, like, Anivia used to be like the stall queen. Like, the game went to 45 minutes no matter what, as long as Anivia wanted it to. That was what that champion did. What makes wave clear a problem is that if your champion gets wave clear but doesn't have to sacrifice some other power in their kit, then your champion's a problem. Take, for example, Azir. Azir is a very strong champion, especially in the late game. His scaling is amazing. He plays from a range. He's got good DPS. He pokes well. And he wave clears. Or at least he did before Riot gutted him a little bit. And now Azir's not in a good place. See, his kit has that flaw where they took away a lot of what made his champion good. And we're going to talk about this concept more when we get down here to Talia. But the problem is not wave clear all by itself. The problem is champions who wave clear without giving up something else in their kit or without jeopardizing themselves in order to do so. Think Renekton. If Renekton wants to clear the wave, Renekton has to go into the wave. Usually this isn't a problem. It's also not a problem really for Darius. Because these champions, they have threat in the wave. But in order for these champions to do this, they had to first have threat in the lane. I'm going to use top lane and support in a lot of my examples, because that's mostly what I play. Now, honestly, that's all there is to say on the matter. Okay, ease of roams. Ease of roams is, again, not an issue all by itself. Take Talon, for example. Talon leaves his lane and just runs bottom. Like, he can roam all he wants. There are two problems, and this kind of ties into the second one, related to ease of roam. It's viability of punishing the roam without following, and the ease of forcing the gank on roam. So when they changed jungle around, they resolved a lot of the second problem. Actually, I don't feel like this is so much of a problem as it was. It used to be. So I'm going to talk about 8.7 or so, not too long ago. And also harkening back to like the beginning of Season 7, if you guys played bot lane. But there was, for a period of time, a problem where the enemy jungler just ran into your lane and they got the gank off. They didn't necessarily kill you, but they guaranteed that what happened was their lane got priority. And they paid little for it. Now, if you are a subscriber to Shinshin, you'll know that one of the main reasons this is because camp timers are so long. They're not missing out farm, they're not missing out XP, and their other lanes are not in danger. So it leaves them free to go force ganks on certain lanes, bot lane being the most prevalent victim of forcing ganks. Now, with the changes to XP, the importance of the Scuttle Crab, and increasing the impact that junglers can have fighting each other, 1v1ing and invading, basically increasing the value of good decision-making in the jungle, as well as generally nerfing some of its early game, this doesn't happen so much. I'm not as worried about, the Season 7 Lee Sin walking under my tower at level 6 while I'm level 4 and just kicking me and one-shotting me. It's not as much of a concern anymore. Some mid laners, though, do still suffer from this problem. It's not as bad, but that's what makes roaming and pushing such a problem, is when they can force the gank, is when there's nothing that the recipient can do to assure that the enemy's choice to gank at a bad time punishes them harder. It's always either they break even or the person roaming wins. There's no good response in a lot of cases. Not all cases, but in a lot of cases, that's how it feels. Lastly, lane punishment to the tower. If I'm pushing you in bot lane, this is a problem that takes place mostly in bot lane and sometimes in mid, where the ranged matchups can be a little oppressive, but mostly in bot lane. Let's say Caitlyn has pushed in the enemy bot lane to the tower. She's hitting the tower, and the damage she's doing to the tower is quite considerable. And she will take it eventually if they're allowed to keep shoving in. The same can be said of top lane. Let's say I'm playing something really aggressive or something that shoves well, and I'm just crashing the wave into the tower over and over and over again. Even if I'm not building up a CS advantage, because I'm just splitting the wave every time, shoving it in is giving me pressure on the tower. That's well and good. That's nice. It's convenient sometimes, just depending on what your lane is. If you just don't want to fight them, you just want to get out of lane. That's what you can do to assure that you have some pressure. It's what Emax Nasus strat was back when lane push Nasus was like a big thing. You just shove in and you just make the other player hate their life. The problem with this, though, comes from when you compare that to solo damage on the tower and rewarding the enemy leaving at a poor time or being forced out of lane. I forced the enemy out of lane. I'd say they probably get... I feel like I can force the enemy out of lane. I can be forced out of lane 4 times. That's about how much I feel like I can be forced out of lane before I just lost the lane and there's nothing I can do to pull the ripcord and get back in the lane. I'm just going to have to wait and outscale. I'm going to have to make some sort of comeback. I get 4 mistakes. Now, each of those mistakes goes away depending on when you die. So let's say you die close to your tower with a big wave coming in. Well, of course, that's going to hurt. Or let's say you have to back and you can't clear the wave. Well, that's going to suck a lot. But that is similar to if you leave the lane at a bad time and they crash the wave into your tower, or if they crash the wave into your tower while you're still there. If you're still there, still farming, still taking care of things, it's just as painful at times if a large wave is built up. This creates a problem. First of all, champions who excel at building up a large wave and controlling the wave with minimal interaction, this is part of the problem with enchanters, and we're going to get down here when we talk about Rakan, Lulu, Janna. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But champions who make it easy to control the wave for minimal risk have a very strong option of just avoiding interaction, building up the wave, smashing into the tower, and it's identical in fruition as if you had forced the enemy player to back, with the exception of you don't build as heavy of a CS lead. If you watch Scara, or if you just pay attention, you'll notice that even when bot lane feels like they're absolutely smashing the opponent, CS lead is no more than like 15 CS. That's because the way they're getting that is by avoiding interaction and crashing large waves. Okay, so that creates a problem. You cannot weaken the towers in that situation, or else it'll make it so that those champions who can do that just abuse their lane and there's nothing you can do against them. But it also means that for other lanes, or in other situations, for people with better awareness or rotations, it can often be more difficult to punish people leaving their lanes at a bad time or being forced back. You kind of get the situation where it has to be good enough in this situation, but not too good in another. It has to be good enough when you force them back to make it worth taking the risk to fight them, but it also has to not be good enough that when you just crash the wave into the tower, you get the tower for free 100% of the time. And the result is just an unhappy medium. And that's actually going to be a common theme of today's discussion, so I'm going to put that in bold. Unhappy mediums everywhere. The unhappy medium in this situation is that I crash the wave into tower and I'm rewarded for it, but that reward feels a little bit higher than it should. And also, I forced you out of lane and that reward feels a little bit lower than it should. It does not reward aggression and it rewards low interactivity. This unhappy medium sucks. It makes the game unfun and it largely creates a lot of the unviability problems, or inviability, whichever. A lot of the inviability problems in the game. We're going to cover that more as we talk about champions as a whole, because that has to do more with the, we're going to talk about it here. We're going to talk about risk reward versus cost benefit. Okay, so role interactivity. This one actually largely solved. I don't want to say solved, actually, but it's important I want to talk about this. Role interactivity, the dynamics between roles in times other than team fights, or or objectives. Even in objectives, but yeah. Okay, so comparing, a position. Actually, I'm sorry, I should change this. It should not be role interactivity. This should be position interactivity. So I say my top laner and my jungler. What's the relationship between them? Well, there are a lot of cases where some top lane matchups are such that you don't lose. You're not going to just feed. The enemy's not going to just farm you. But you can't do anything to gain any kind of control or usefulness unless your jungler is there. That's pretty miserable. I'm not totally opposed to it for some champions that scale well, champions that have great late games, champions that are huge, beefy tanks that don't need a lot to function. Take Maokai, or champions that scale obscenely, like Gangplank and Nasus. Those champions, if they're helpless in lane, sure. But for most others, you shouldn't feel helpless in lane. You should never feel like, no matter how good you are, their champion just makes it so that your champion does nothing. And the result of that is that a lot of times top laners are totally dependent on their jungler. Very unfortunate. There's not a lot that can be done about it unless individual champions are assessed and addressed. And that comes down to role problems, not position. Then compare mid and jungle. Recently, the change to mid and jungle made it so that jungle was very dependent on mid to extend their own personal lead. Whereas previously, getting any lead on a jungle felt useless. You get a lead on jungle, you feel useless because you can't do anything with that. Your ability to help your team, unless you're a solo carry, like Shyvana or Yi or something stupid, unless you're a solo carry, helping your team does not get any easier just because you're stronger, unless you are drastically stronger, like 3 kills up and 20 CS in a level. You got to be ahead of the enemy laner, not just of your matchup. The changes recently with shifting that into jungle being more reliant on mid have resolved a lot of those issues where you feel useless as a jungler and jungle can't carry, where bot laners feel helpless against the jungle and top lane is so dependent. Now top lane and bot lane are more of an island, jungle is more reliant on mid. That's kind of shifted up the dynamics and it's helped. It's nice. But there are still problems, such as the condition in mid where priority is so easy to come by and so little interactivity necessary to try and obtain. Jungle often feels helpless. And that's a problem. The scale is shifted too far the other way. I don't think that the issue is at the core of the relationship between jungle and its solo lanes, but rather it's an issue where problems in the meta of mid lane bleed over too heavily into jungle. Okay, free is not fun for everyone. This is being addressed, present progressive tense, being addressed with support changes. And support is the most egregious offender here. I play support I can tell you, it's broken. Like if you're not playing support right now, go play support because it's broken. It's stupid. Because as support, you govern your team's comeback. And you may be able to say, okay, support is the parachute. Your team's falling behind. What is the safety net? It's like your support. Your support is good no matter how far behind they are. It's like, makes sense. If my support is talented, they'll be the safety net that saves our team. Okay. But that's a problem when supports are also a multiplier for their team's carry potential. So that means that supports double dip. They take from both ends. That is because they get free gold and utility. They just do. They get so much of it. There is, and it's all, a large portion of it is difficult to balance because it relies on another person to be efficient. Take Zeke's Harbinger. Zeke's Convergence? Yeah, that's what it is now. Zeke's Convergence. That item gives so much. It gives so much. It's actually broken. If you're not spamming Zeke's in ranked, you're playing the game wrong. That item is broken. But the reason that item is broken is because it's a percentage multiplier to your team's damage. Or rather, the highest damage on your team if you're playing it right. Which is problematic because for obvious reasons. It's for so little gold, you're getting a multiplier. So as your team scales, you're accelerating their scaling. And I cannot emphasize to you how much of a problem that is. Take, for instance, when Zeal items cost like 300 to 250 gold less than they did, and before IE was changed. Zeal items were the most scaling items in the game, and they were also super efficient and super cheap, and it meant that ADs were spiking at 1 or 2 items. It was the thing which acted as the catalyst driving us towards that problem when bot lane just ruled everything. In a lot of cases, bot lane it doesn't rule things so much now, but I think that's mostly just because bot lane is reeling from just the total shakeup that Riot just hit them with. And I don't think that it really was anything other than that, a shakeup. I don't think it was a change for good or worse. I think they've just shifted some stuff around, mixed up the cups, and hoping you're not going to guess which part of the shell game we're playing. Okay. And then take Redemption or Locket. Okay, you're taking your awesomeness, what makes you good, and then keeping your ally alive, even just the slightest amount longer. It's so much. It makes all of those items, all of those support items that offer just direct sustainability or damage to your allies, makes you a multiplier for them. And it means that you scale as well as they do. That's the problem. You pay 0 gold, nothing, and you get the gold that you do need to make up for that 0 gold you owe the shop, free from just assists and bounties. That was reeled back some, but the problem still exists because support items are so cheap, but they scale so well. And it doesn't matter that support isn't getting gold from farm because of the gold that they would be getting is then going to the person whom they are scaling with. It creates this disgusting cyclical effect. It's part of the reason Taric Yi is so disgusting. It's like it doesn't matter that Taric is useless because Yi is more useful and Taric is a multiplier for Yi. So here, if I could explain it with some math, here's Yi, and Taric is a multiplier for that, and it's very effective. Okay? Now let's compare if Yi was just farming by himself and Taric was just farming by himself. They become summative. Now Taric is still a multiplier here. But Yi is much smaller than he was. And Taric is now bigger. Taric is more impactful than he used to be. He's drastically more impactful because he's farming. But it doesn't matter because the increment by which Tarek increased is not proportional to the increment by which Yi decreased. Basically, Tarek is less efficient. That's what makes him a support. He's less efficient. There you go. It's that simple. Which means that if you can do that, if you can get away with that, you give so much to your team. And then you can make it so that individually it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that the support themselves is inefficient, because by being a multiplier to a more efficient champion, they result in a larger total than if the support was receiving a large income. And that's how scaling works. Like, if you're not familiar with it, that's how it works. Is getting more out of less. It's a multiplicative effect, you know. Individually, Zeal items aren't that great, but when you start adding them together, the synergy between their stats makes them grossly more efficient. So for the limited 6 items that you have, and for fairly nominal gold income, you turn what would be just a black cleaver on, you know, a top laner into 3 times that worth of stats, because it synergizes so well with your kit and your item's internal synergies. That's how that works. Okay, risk reward. Risk reward is mostly a skill reliant factor. And knowledge. Skill and knowledge. This is distinct from cost benefit. So I'm going to talk about both of these kind of in conjunction as we go. We compare skill reliant factors. You know, you think about what champions have a high skill cap. Okay, I'd say, I'm sorry, I'm actually not great at this. Okay, let's say Blitzcrank, not easy. Thresh, not easy. What else is hard to pull off? Draven is hard. Gangplank isn't easy. His reward may be a little higher than his risk, but he's not easy. Who else is hard? Xerath isn't easy. Not to mention, his numbers are just fucking terrible. I mean, if you get ahead with him, good job, but if not, well, you're useless. Gragas isn't easy. These champions are all hard. And making mistakes on them is easily punished. In order to put yourself in a position to benefit from their skill reward mechanisms, in order to benefit from their difficult CC, their high damage, actually in all of these cases, that's what it is. Blitzcrank and Thresh have their high impact CC, and Draven, Gangplank, Xerath, and Gragas all have tons of damage. So how? What makes them in this position? So I'm going to talk about the mechanisms by which they reach these points. Blitzcrank and Thresh. They have a cooldown based period of feast and famine. When their abilities are on cooldown, they do nothing. They're useless. They're useless without cooldowns. Which means that they mess it up, they're just basically not a champion. And in order to even put themselves in a position to use their abilities, because they're straight line, slow moving skill shots that don't go through, units, they also position themselves in places where they are vulnerable to retaliation. At range. They make themselves vulnerable to retaliation at range. I misspelled retaliation. Okay, then compare, let's say Gragas. He has to get in your face. It's that simple. He has to get in your face. If Gragas is not getting in your face, Gragas isn't doing anything. That's how the champion works. Gangplank. He has to constantly be getting out of your face. In both cases, they rely on just immaculate positioning. If at any point they're mispositioned, they're punished hard for it. If Gangplank's too close, Gangplank just gets blown up and he dies. It's too bad. You're a squishy champion, and until you have like 4 items, too bad. You have 4 items, you can usually just fight your way out of it, and your, orange is enough. But getting there means that you have to not screw up the entire time on your way there. Gragas, as soon as Gragas gets out of range to hit you with his E, or to get any meaningful damage out of his Q, you escape. And if he's just going to run at you, he's a big, fat, slow-moving target that's not easily going to dodge your abilities. And if he uses his E to dodge your ability, well, then he has nothing to pursue you with, or nothing to start his attack once he gets there. Gragas has to not let you get away from him. He has to throw his abilities properly, he has to line it up, he has to see in 4 dimensions, basically, to know the play, know where he's going to go, and how he's going to get out. Otherwise, he just dies. And if he messes it up at any point along the way, he ends up in a position where there's nothing for him to do. He's just trapped himself. He's made a mistake. And then lastly, we talk about Xerath and Draven. Neither of them have particularly easy early games. They're both easily abused. Or no, I'm sorry, that's a different. Early games. Farming with Xerath, fucking hard. And managing your mana with his passive, hard. It's difficult. And it's part of the reason that Xerath sucks, is because he struggles to get priority and he struggles to wave clear until very late in the game. At which point, it's just a moot point because the ADC beats him out on it anyway. Draven, he's got to catch his axes. He's got to be all over. He has to maintain lane priority. He has to not take bad trades. And if either... No, actually, that's more cost reward. I mean, cost benefit. Okay. They both have to commit fully to fights, because not doing so means they lose more in resources than they gain in pressure, unless they force the enemy out or kill them. So what does this mean? It means Draven trades with you. He spams his W and his E to get through the trade, and he's shoving in the wave, and he's maintaining priority. Cool. He's done that, but he's going to burn through his mana instantly. That W is expensive, and you're constantly casting it. That E is really expensive, actually. If he drops an axe, that's an additional, 40 mana he has to recast, just to auto-attack effectively. Just to remain in a gold-positive status, with his stats, just so that he could, if he walked up and just auto-attacked you, just stood there and you went auto for auto with him, in order to not be at an inherent disadvantage, Draven has to continuously pay 40 mana or do this mechanic, catch his axes. Xerath, again, he's got to walk up, he's got to get his passive in order to recover his spells, in order to maintain pressure, in order to continue poking out the enemy. He has to land consistently meaningful poke, otherwise he'll just himself, and then after the first few backs, when he's got something to stabilize his mana, doesn't matter because Xerath isn't ahead enough. He's not ahead enough. He's not riding the front wave of that being ahead, being a carry. In both cases, they have to commit, which means that they're vulnerable to ganks. They're vulnerable to the enemy outplaying them. It means that they have to legitimately be better than the other player and to pay more attention to the map. Okay. Talking about cost benefit. Cost benefit is incredibly similar to risk reward. However, it's not based on champion skill or mastery, but rather it relies on what is inherent to the champion's kit. So let's take Nasus for example. Nasus, you have to stack. If you don't stack, you're useless. Okay, cool. Which means that you're vulnerable in the early game because the ability that you max is not the ability that you use to improve your security or trading power in lane. It means that after level 2, you lose every fight. You just do. Until you've drastically outstacked the enemy. It means you have to constantly be on top of your wave management and control. Okay, sure. That's inherent to the champion's kit. You know, whether you're good or bad at Nasus, as long as you're farming, you're farming. That is something the champion gives up. You know, in picking this champion, you make the decision in champ select, I'm going to go to late. Let's say you pick an ADC over a tank. I mean, this is at the most base level, but taking a high damage champion as opposed to a low damage durable champion, you've made a decision about how you're going to play. And more importantly, you've made a decision about how the enemy has to retaliate to what you do. That's what it comes down to. The ability of the enemy to retaliate and the means by which they must do it. So, what do you do when you see someone lock in Vayne against you? What do you do? Obviously, you just camper. You just camp the weak champions who need a safe early game to survive. What do? You do the same thing to Kog'Maw. You just camp the Kog'Maw, you pick something super aggressive that's going to abuse him early, and you make sure he never gets ahead of the gold curve on you. Because if he's even with you, or he's behind, he's just going to lose until 45 minutes. That's just how that champion works. You take a really early game reliant champion, you know, they pick Darius, or they pick Renekton, something that needs to get ahead to start. Okay? Well, you try to catch them doing something risky, and you just outplay them. You outplay the high risk, high reward champion, and boom, suddenly you're ahead. Everything that was once a benefit for them is now a handicap. The enemy picks Alistar. They pick a melee range. You outrange them. You pick Lux. Okay? You picked Lux. What do? I pick something that's going to easily get on top of you because you lack mobility. That's how that works. And then it creates a system where I have a thing I need to accomplish to beat you, and you have a thing you need to accomplish to beat me. This creates a very important distinction. It emphasizes the importance. Hello? Thank you. This emphasizes the importance of being better than the enemy instead of meeting some minimum level of talent in order to auto-win. It doesn't matter how good you are at Graves if the enemy is just better than you at Trundle. It just doesn't matter. Now, take Zoe, for instance. The opposite is true. If you are at least some minimum level good at Zoe, as long as you can hit abilities, even once in a blue moon, it doesn't matter because that champion rewards success so heavily that it does not matter if they're better than you, as long as you meet some minimum skill requirement of being able to 50-50 your abilities, because most champions are designed that 50% of the time they'll hit their abilities for an average skill level. As long as you can 50-50 with that champion, you win. That's that champion. That's what makes that champion broken. What do you do in response to Zoe? Zoe does not have a clear or overt weakness, so all it comes down to is whether or not Zoe is able to do the thing she needs to do to meet her win condition. This is important. Win condition are unhealthy and upset balance. There are few win condition champions. Veigar is one of them. Eventually, Veigar just has so much AP, there's nothing you can do. Kog'Maw is another. Eventually, Kog'Maw just does so much damage from so much range, there's just nothing you can do. Yi is another. Eventually, Yi just, you can't stop him, you can't CC him, you can never hit him because he's alpha striking, he hits you so fast and for so much damage. Eventually, there's nothing you can do. Nasus is another. Eventually, Nasus is going to one-shot your Nexus. It's going to happen. Eventually, your base is just going to fall. Those champions have a clear, defined win condition. If Kindred wasn't such a steaming pile of crap, Kindred would be another. Because eventually Kindred will just outrange your towers. Eventually Kindred will just do so much damage from such a range, from such safety, there's nothing you can do. Those are called win condition champions. What else? There are champions with guaranteed CCs. Guaranteed CC with high impact. Take Rakan, for example. Guaranteed... God, can I not spell? Yes. With high impact. Take Rakan, for example. We're going to talk about him later in one of the other videos. I've got him down here on my list. Take Rakan, for example. Rakan's win condition is having someone else on his team that can follow him up. That's it. As long as someone can follow him up, Rakan will land the CC. Rakan will tie up time with the enemy team. He will do a stupid amount of damage. It's going to happen. So what do you do against Rakan to stop him from getting to that point? Well, the answer is nothing, and we're going to talk about that when we get down to individual champions. Now, this is as opposed to loss conditions. I'm going to put a space in here because loss conditions doesn't look as nice as win conditions. All right, loss conditions. Let's say you're Darius. Darius. Eventually, you fall off. That's what it is. That is Darius's loss condition. But the difference is that Darius and the enemy team have something they get to fight over as to whether or not Darius reaches that point where he falls off. If you're good at Darius and the enemy team is just bad, you can steamroll. You can just steamroll them and solo carry. That's one way to do it. You just keep killing people, you just remain ahead of the game gold curve, and you just end the game. End the game at 15 minutes. You know, just FF and go next. That's one way. The other way, another option, this is the important part, options. Extend your lead to others. Darius wins his lane, he has priority, and he's got maybe a kill. He's strong enough that now if he goes to another lane or he catches the jungler out, he's just going to win the 2v2. He's going to secure for his team any objective they want to get. Because if he's fighting an even numbers fight, he's fighting a downhill battle. He's fighting a battle with the upper ground so hard. He has to extend his lead to others. Let's say you're playing Alistar. You are only useful if you can get on top of people. Cool. What does the enemy have to do? That means they have to out frontline you. Notice how this is different from Alistar's win condition being he gets on top of people. There's a difference here. Alistar getting on top of people does not guarantee that he's useful, because Alistar having the opportunity to do so comes down to whether or not he outplays the enemy. Rakan, on the other hand, or Zoe, on the other hand, having the opportunity to do what they want to do is not something that the enemy team gets to make a decision about. That's the difference between a win condition and a loss condition. A win condition is something where the enemy team does not get to do anything to impact your opportunity to do what you want to do. It all just comes down to your ability to do what you want to do. Loss conditions come down to whether or not you can wrestle from the enemy the opportunity for you to shine and do what your kit does best. That's the difference. Actually, now that I think about it like that, I don't even think Kog'Maw belongs in the win conditions category. Because Kog'Maw has to survive to get to that point. Kog'Maw has to survive. The game has to last that long. And that's where we will get down into champions as a whole, where we're going to talk about interactions. We'll talk about how Anivia, in that case, would stall out for the Kog'Maw. Ah, there you go. That's what team compositions. That's what game dynamics. And we're gonna talk about that when we get into champions as a whole, normalized experiences, and comparability. This is different from champion identity. But that's all for now. So to recap, some of the major problems with the game as a whole are problems with pacing and the lack of effort necessary to force the game to stay in or move to a different phase. There's no skill element, mechanic, or gate involved in being able to force the early game to end and for mid game to start. Position interactivity. This has gotten better, but it's still not perfect. The healthy way in which lanes can interact with each other. Free is not fun for everyone. This comes down to efficiency for champions and how it's ridiculous the way in which some supports, especially supports, but other champions as well, their ability to synergize and act as a multiplier does not come at some greater cost than their independent strength. They need to be, if there's so much of a boon, they need to be a handicap in other ways, and that's the problem. That actually comes down here to win conditions. Tarek has a win condition because Tarek just presses R and that's his win condition as long as someone else is able to do something with that. You can't take away from Tarek his opportunity to press R. That's what that champion needs, is something, an opportunity to deprive him of being able to do what he wants to do. Then we talked about risk reward and how skill is a separate factor from cost benefit. How skill comes down to the availability of being punished. It doesn't matter if you have to be good to take a lead. What matters is that if you're bad, you fall behind. And then cost benefit comes down to setting up the dynamics between champions and their kits so that your champion has something that the enemy can do about it, not just relying on you to mess up and make mistakes. Thank you for joining me. My name is Azaranth, and I'll see you on the Rift.